Hello.
Our story begins in a rush on Coruscant. General Grievous's plan to capture the Chancellor was disrupted by Jedi interference. Not only was Master Shaak Ti able to hold her own, but Jedi reinforcements in the shape of Pablo Jill and Coleman Kaj helped her fend off the droid general. Grievous was stuck in an unfavorable position because of these Jedi reinforcements. The two counselors and Jedi Knight were fine adversaries, and unluckily, Grievous was on a time crunch. The ground assault on Coruscant didn't last as long as they had planned on, and if the cowardly droid general wanted to fight another day, then he needed to go. After fending off the assaults from Masters Jill and Kaj, as Shaak Ti pushed Palpatine away into the hands of the Coruscant guardsmen, Grievous lunged through a window. As he was making his escape, he found members of the Naboo Guard escorting their senator into another vessel. Clones were holding a firing line on the other side, and the lead security officer with Padme forced her hand. He had heard reports that Grievous was inside the executive building. In an effort to get her out of harm's way, she's being pushed towards an awaiting vessel. Grievous, seeing his opportunity to accomplish his mission, sped to the Naboo guards, slicing them down without much struggle, before abducting Padme before she could escape. It was seamless, which left Pablo Jill and Coleman Kaj to fall behind before they could ever stop General Grievous. Mace Windu also arrived as backup, but it was far too late for any of them to stop the droid. Grievous wasn't pleased with any of this, and if it were up to his own design, he would have stayed behind to fight Shaak Ti, Pablo Jill, and Coleman Kaj, believing that he could have killed the three of them with relative ease. Upon his return to the Invisible Hand, Grievous was met with a very underwhelmed and unhappy Lord Tyrannus. Dooku was hoping that Palpatine could be here for his plan, and seeing how they had gone awry, he was left more irritated than he was before. Dooku knew the war was coming to an end, and it was very stressful on him. Cities put a lot of pressure onto Dooku to make sure everything went by with little trouble, which Dooku had done, but as the final hours of the Clone War drew closer, he started to piece something together. He hadn't fully come to the conclusion yet, but essentially he was beginning to see that he didn't have a place in the coming Empire. Dooku put those fears aside, believing that he had misinterpreted his feelings. Regardless, Lord Tyrannus told General Grievous to put Padme into a shuttle. He had a plan. Dooku's feelings made him uncomfortable, and he wanted to feel assured that he wouldn't be betrayed. So in an effort to remove himself from danger and take control over this happy accident, he'd send Anakin far away from Palpatine. Dooku felt it during their engagement on Obadiah, a few short months beforehand. Dooku wasn't as powerful as he once was, and if Anakin activated his trap card of doubling his powers, then surely he'd be in trouble. His plan consisted of getting Skywalker to come to Coruscant, then chase General Grievous across the stars, forcing Palpatine to go forward with his plans without Anakin's presence. He hoped that this would confirm that Sidious had no intentions of replacing him. On the other hand, Anakin and Obi-Wan were informed of Padme's capture, and in a rush of panic, Anakin divided up the 501st to accompany Ahsoka to Mandalore, but she only got a small division of the 501st, because he didn't have the proper mindset to divide the units properly, leaving Rex and Ahsoka with less men than necessary. Anakin truthfully couldn't think about anything else. If he waited any more than 5 more minutes, he would have ditched Obi-Wan for Coruscant inside of his Eta-class starfighter. Skywalker was pressed, and thus the invasion of Mandalore would commence with a much smaller fighting force than was necessary. So once Ahsoka's division accompanied her to the surface, their fight would become stuck in gridlock. The men of the 332nd were very elite, and some of the longest-serving members of the 501st, but they were outnumbered. As Ahsoka's first wave touched the surface of Sundari, the siege began with a slow start. Pushing into the actual city required an intensive line of cover fire, and the landing of the several ATTEs present with the unit. Across the rims, inside the core, Skywalker and Kenobi arrived at a hyperspace. Their assault would go very similarly, with them eventually landing inside the Invisible Hand after Obi-Wan decided to play with buzz droids. Obi-Wan was very quickly becoming frustrated with Anakin's antics though. He was well aware of the secret fling, but it was affecting Anakin's actions, and if he wasn't careful, then it could cost them both greatly. But Anakin wasn't really in the mood for lessons on patience. R2 was able to do a readout of the ship, identifying that Padme was nowhere to be seen. What they didn't know is that she was on the other side of the hangar bay, stuck inside of a Separatist shuttle. Padme was frustrated, similar to Anakin, so as her husband was trying to do an extensive search of the Invisible Hand, she was trying to break out. She had cufflinks that tied her to a pipe inside the vessel, and there were 2 Magna Guards stationed by the entrance of the shuttle. Their job was to lower the ramp for Grievous when he came out. Padme, knowing that they weren't paying much attention to her, slipped her legs over the cuffs so that she could face the pipe instead of away from it. She tugged lightly, which created a small ringing noise, nothing loud enough to get the guards to turn around. Out from her sleeve, she pulled a pin with her teeth and started working on the cuffs with her hands. She didn't really have much of a plan here, but if she could get out, that was much better than being stuck. Outside of the shuttle, Anakin brushed through the corridors before bursting through Dooku's quarters and finding the Count quite surprised. He assumed Anakin would have gone for the tower of the ship, because that's where the most important prisoners would have been found. The Count was in a deep meditation too, and he was very unprepared for Anakin's attack. Tyrannus lifted himself up from his knees and pulled a saber from the other side of the room, igniting it just in time to save himself from Anakin's attack. Kenobi, who had fallen behind, was trapped by 2 Magna Guards and forced to fend them off, as he listened to Anakin banging his lightsaber away in the distance. Master and apprentice were frustrated for 2 very different reasons, but it didn't stop Anakin from concentrating on his opponent. He threatened Dooku, and the Count played dumb, because he was genuinely caught off guard. His meditation revolved around his concerns over Palpatine betraying him. The fact that Skywalker showed up was basically a confirmation of what he feared being a reality. Anakin slugged his saber at Dooku, who narrowly avoided the strike by tilting his head backwards. Skywalker, then using his physical strength, interlocked blades with Dooku before shoving him chest first into the glass of his quarters. Anakin threatened to kill both of them if he didn't reveal the location of his wife. Skywalker dragged his saber towards Dooku's neck, as it remained interlocked on Tyrannus' side. Their blades continued pressing until Dooku slipped out, using the Force to throw Anakin. This made Dooku realize that he had been training Anakin to kill him, so that Sidious could replace him with a new apprentice, and it gave Dooku the extra motivation to win this fight. The generational duelist and chosen one slammed together in the middle of the quarters, their fight evening out, as Kenobi slipped into the room, only to be electrocuted and flung out. This only encouraged Skywalker's rage. Their weapons batted away, and so Dooku threatened Anakin, hoping to throw him off his game. He said absurdities to Anakin about his wife, telling him that they would kill her mercilessly. This brought Anakin's darkest self out, and Kenobi got to watch it unfold before his very eyes. Anakin typically hid this behavior from Obi-Wan, but not this time. Anakin gripped Dooku's blade and shattered the hilt with his bare, metallic hand. The crystal within it slipped into his hands and he crushed it with all of his strength, creating an explosion-like effect. But instead of bursting, Anakin shoved the crystal into Dooku's face, blowing off Skywalker's entire metallic hand and immensely burning Dooku's skin. The unarmed Tyrannus wailed in pain, but Anakin pulled his saber down and shoved it through Dooku's sternum, and shoved him into the wall before pulling the saber out of his victim and slashing him down 3 more times. Obi-Wan stood in horror of what his student had done, and who he'd become. Anakin twisted around and told Kenobi that they needed to find Padme now. She was in danger. Kenobi stood in Anakin's way, telling him to stop and think for a second. Would Padme want to see Anakin in such rage? And Skywalker physically moved Obi-Wan into the other side of the doorway, telling him that Padme would want to be saved. Anakin's destroyed metallic hand burned through Obi-Wan's robes, as Skywalker pulled away and stormed down the hall without one of his very useful assets. Padme, on the other hand, twisted a click within the cuffs that held her against her will. She almost dropped them on the floor but caught the elongated chain and held it before it could hit the ground. She excitedly moved off to the other side of the cabin, pulling a pistol off the wall and making sure the safety was off. She took a deep breath and pulled the trigger twice, destroying the first Magna Guard and critically wounding the other, which she finished off with a final shot to the head. Padme didn't know what to do now, but she lowered the ramp and noticed that 2 Jedi starfighters had landed, one of which being Anakin's. It made her happy knowing that he had survived the whispers of the Outer Rim sieges, but she was worried because Dooku and Grievous were also on board. Just as Padme started to make a move for one of the starfighters, she was picked off of the ground. Padme let out a yelp that caught R2-D2's attention, giving him a chance to inform Anakin of their location. General Grievous put Padme down and forced her to turn back towards the ship, his metallic grip holding her shoulder and making her move. She tried to fight it, but Grievous held a pressure point that made it very hard to resist. As she started moving up the ramp, she told Grievous that she could save him from the aftermath of the war, and he pushed her, coughing as he did. He told her that no such offers would be necessary to him. He would champion himself as victor over the galaxy. Without Dooku in his way, he had no problem doing whatever he wished to do. Padme was confused, trying to understand why Dooku was dead, but Grievous had seen Skywalker burst through Dooku's door thanks to security recordings, and he had just been informed via radio that the Count did not exit said room, so chances are he was dead. Just as Grievous was about to enter the ship, he was hit in the back by a heavy thud, and he fell on his face, which was admittedly embarrassing for him. Grievous grabbed a saber and turned around, igniting it. Just as his weapon came around the side of his body, he was zapped by a little blue astromech, the one buying Anakin time. Grievous wheezed before swinging aggressively. R2 slipped out of the way, bursting him again with a zap. The two of them moved in circles before Grievous, instead of swinging, planted his claw right inside R2's torso and smashed him into the ground. The droid beeped out of control as his voice slowly became dimmer. Grievous raised his lightsaber over his head, but the door behind him opened, revealing Skywalker and Kenobi. Grievous picked R2 up and lobbed him at Anakin, who used the Force to catch the droid and put him down gently before rushing at the droid general. Padme let out a cry for help before the engines on the shuttle started up and Grievous pulled forward. Skywalker raised his hand and his handless arm to stop the ship. He concentrated with the dark side of the Force to hold onto the vessel. Grievous pressed the engine down harder and harder, but they wouldn't budge. Anakin yelled at Kenobi to prepare to fight Grievous, but Obi-Wan noticed something, grabbing a tracker from Anakin's belt as he lobbed it at the ship. A mere second or two after he did that, Grievous stopped the engines on the shuttle as it dropped out of the sky and fled towards Anakin as he pulled it towards him. He winced, preparing for impact, but Grievous shoved the engines in as hard as he could, launching Kenobi and Skywalker from their feet as Grievous sped out of the hangar bay. Now with burn marks on his face, Anakin grabbed R2 and threw him into the astromech slot on his starship and lifted off, not even considering the fact that Obi-Wan couldn't fly. It left Kenobi needing reinforcements, something that would follow a very stressful broadside from a lead venator in the fleet. Skywalker, on the other hand, sped after Grievous, peppering the side of the shuttle, hoping to destroy the engines and save his wife. Anakin spun through debris and chased after the expert pilot that was Grievous. The two of them sped across battle lines, but Grievous was diligent in getting tri-droids to chase Skywalker down. He, with his communication array damaged, couldn't call for reinforcements, and thus was forced to use his talent and skill to avoid these attackers. General Grievous, inversely, sped forward and passed a few Separatist frigates before slamming his hyperdrive in and departing for hyperspace. Anakin wheeled around, as R2 gave him projected coordinates of General Grievous' location. They popped on his dashboard and Anakin noted it, before spinning past a venator and buzzing the bridge. It was a Republic command that typically let other officers know that a Jedi was out of communications and needed something. So the first-time battle officer inside the vessel panicked, calling a wing of V-Wings to help Anakin, deploying the hyperspace ring just in case, and even dedicating a few surface-level cannons to defend Skywalker. Luckily, Anakin just wanted a hyperspace ring, and he connected to it, while speeding away from the pursuing tri-droids. He would position himself up with Grievous' location and press the hyperdrive in, abandoning Coruscant altogether. Sadly, it wouldn't be until he entered hyperspace that Anakin realized he had failed R2. His astromech fell offline once they jumped to hyperspace, R2's last actions being in the service of his best friends. While Anakin pursued Grievous across the stars, the Battle of Coruscant came to a close. Obi-Wan would have to unfortunately snitch on his student, because let's call it what it was. He snitched on Anakin, instead of being quiet about his actions. After having let Skywalker get away with so much, Obi-Wan put a stop to it after watching Anakin absolutely gut Dooku inside the invisible hand. The Council would be very troubled, but the issue is, they had no clue where Skywalker was, so they couldn't reasonably do anything about his actions. The tracker that Obi-Wan threw onto the shuttle was connected to Anakin's vessel, not his own, so by accident, Obi-Wan set Anakin up to chase Grievous alone, and for the rest of the Jedi, this meant they had their own issues regarding the rest of the war. Dooku was dead, and Grievous wouldn't be leading any battles, and this was a compliment from the Council about Anakin. They knew General Grievous would be too occupied by Skywalker's presence, and with Padme to worry about, he couldn't be leading another assault or division, so this was their chance to wrap the war up. Luckily, without Grievous or Dooku, the Separatist Council would take charge, and they were playing very fearfully, even disregarding what Sidious wanted them to do, so the Jedi wouldn't need to send their entire council out to stop various forces around the galaxy. The only counselor to leave Coruscant who hadn't already left was Obi-Wan. The council elected that he should go to Kashyyyk because it was an important strategic world, but he also needed to be away from the situation regarding Skywalker. They were aware that Kenobi had told them the truth, but there was something else he was hiding. They could all sense it. So the added benefit was that Master Unduli and her underprepared 41st Legion had the 212th and 7th Sky Corps as a necessary reinforcement to the defense. Yoda, on the other hand, needed to remain on Coruscant. If he, Windu, or Fisto needed to go and save Anakin, they were going to be the ones to do it, not anyone else. Over Siskiyne, General Grievous' shuttle departed from hyperspace and fled to the surface. On the ground, he had a command base that was defended loosely. He sped through the hidden caverns and into a landing bay, where he brought Padme into a command center. Following Grievous' little incident with Kit Fisto and his little Mon Cala Padawan, Dooku sent Grievous to Siskiyne. It was close to Geonosis, and it should be safer for the poor Whittle General. More than anything, this location was meant to punish General Grievous, but he had transformed the outpost into an actual base. He sent a super tactical droid to the location, stocked the base with turbo cannons, installed a command center, and even updated his collection. Here is where every single lightsaber was returned to. Every kill had a pillar, and it marked his pride as a warrior. General Grievous privately went to the communication table to assess the damage following Coruscant, and even though it frustrated him, he looked over the Separatist Council's plan. Their decision to hide away made him disappointed, but it was the right move. Without Sidious knowing of this facility, he couldn't contact Grievous, which led the droid general to believing that the Sith were going to set him up for failure. As he went through the strategy laid out by the Separatist Council, his super tactical droid informed him of the soon-to-commence assault at Kashyyyk. Grievous then told the droid to send extra forces there. If they could diminish Republic morale with a genocide, then perhaps they could swing things back into their power. Out on Mandalore, the clones of the 332nd continued to struggle. While Bo-Katan successfully beat Governor Almec in a fight, the rest of the assault wasn't going so positively. The Death Watch warriors weren't as outnumbered, and therefore no reason to go into the sewers where Maul remained. This forced Ahsoka to stay on the front lines of combat and fight her heart out. The clones followed behind them, but they didn't know about the counterattack that Crimson Dawn's leader was preparing to bring. He saw blood in the water, and Anakin's hasty mistake was about to cause serious pain for the unit that served with Ahsoka. Back on Siskiyne, Anakin's starfighter arrived at a hyperspace. He sped through the atmosphere and to the surface, and when he landed, he jumped out of his starfighter and pulled R2 out with his wrist and his hand. He took a deep breath and put the blue astromech on the ground, and held him quietly. Anakin spoke into R2's audio receptors, and promised his friend that he would save him and Padme and the galaxy. He promised that he would be better. Having spent so much time in hyperspace alone, Anakin had time to think about his actions. Firstly, Dooku absolutely deserved to die, but secondly, he may have acted a little rash. His emotions were on his sleeve, and now having fully realized that he had abandoned Coruscant without a communication array, he was left to work alone. He couldn't check in on Obi-Wan or Ahsoka. He couldn't know if they even won at Coruscant, or if the war had come to a close. So he needed to find Grievous, destroy him, and claim victory. If he could do that, then perhaps he could return to Coruscant with a hero's welcome. And while it was never about the public spotlight in this scenario, he knew that Obi-Wan would tell the Council about his actions with Dooku. The image of horror on Obi-Wan's face ate away at Anakin in his mind. Skywalker, under the cover of dusk and a rising mist, would begin his trek through the rough terrain of Siskiyne. He hoped that it wouldn't take too long. He uninstalled the dashboard display and used one of R2's spare batteries to power it. Turns out he wasn't super far from Grievous' location, but something was throwing off the tracker. It was disrupted by some sort of anomaly, that of course being that the signal was coming from underground. After hours of searching, Anakin would find one of the multiple turbo lasers protecting the base. Using his lightsaber, he would cut into the unmanned turret and use it as a means to slip under the surface to the actual base. Anakin's eyes remained peeled for any sign of Grievous, but what he saw worried him. The general had a genuine base here. This wasn't at all equatable to the layer that Fisto spoke about in his old debriefing. Skywalker moved around corners, trying to maintain his stamina. He was slowing down because he'd been awake for almost 24 hours, but he knew that a fresh boost of adrenaline would help get his mind active enough for him to start moving around. Anakin moved in the shadows of the dimly lit corridors. He kept his eyes peeled for Padme, but instead of rush action, he stopped behind a pillar and closed his eyes, harmonizing with the Force and attempting to find Padme. She was here somewhere, but where was the question? Not far from his position, Padme stood inside the command center, antagonizing Grievous. She'd ask him some stupid questions that she, of course, knew the answer to, just to piss him off. And guess what? It was working really well. Grievous kept getting angrier every time she lobbed a question at him, but he still hadn't killed her. The worst part is, it was entirely because he was trying to fully understand why Dooku wanted her away from the Republic. He kept her alive because he thought she had some sort of trade value, and Grievous was trying to strategically think of a use for her, which she couldn't. He didn't understand why Dooku kept her alive, so the more she asked him questions or took shots at his height, he continued to seethe on the inside, because he couldn't kill her just yet. Grievous was also moving around pawns on a chessboard, so he couldn't really focus entirely on Padme's purpose on the scheme. But after she asked him another question, this time if his claws were equatable to heels, considering they did give him a couple inches of height, he raged. The tactical droid therefore removed her from the command center, which is the worst thing that could have ever happened. Anakin was getting closer to them anyways, and hearing Grievous literally yell gave him their position. Skywalker lunged through the Magna Guards at the front of the room. They didn't even see him coming because he dropped down from above and swung his saber around himself, before rolling through the entranceway and cutting both down. Skywalker sealed the door behind him and pointed his weapon at Grievous. The droid general didn't really appreciate this, but he noticed Anakin's missing hand, so he readied 2 weapons. Grievous had killed plenty of Jedi, and now, the hero of the Republic would become his greatest trophy. The 2 of them moved outwards, away from the communication table, because Grievous still needed it to win this war. Each opponent readied themselves, as Anakin remembered that he was without his other hand. Grievous moved first, putting Skywalker on the defense, but he adjusted quickly and well. Their blades collided, dragging across one another's surface before pairing. Grievous used his 2 weapons aggressively, and Anakin, who had fought Ventress enough times, countered where he could. The 2 of them were in a tandem that danced across the communication room floors. Grievous kicked forward, nearly clawing Anakin, but he spun under the move, catching a block where a stab should have been landed. Skywalker ripped his blade around, struggling because Grievous' cybernetics outmatched his singular human hand. Anakin and Grievous interlocked, and Grievous bared down his opponent, but Anakin used his momentum against the general, launching him over his head and through a window, out into the main corridor inside the outpost. Droids nearby turned to see the commotion, as the super tactical droid holding Padme stopped and turned around. Anakin marched to the hole in the wall, and met Grievous' aggression with his own. This was his chance to take the fight back for himself. Their weapons slammed together, and Anakin grinned, forcing his saber into Grievous' defense. The droid general, sensing his own failure to defend himself against Anakin's rapid strikes, moved for his other sabers, igniting 2 more and parrying Anakin at his most vulnerable position. Skywalker's hand was grazed, forcing him to lose hold of his saber. As Grievous seized the opportunity, Anakin thrusted his stub at his opponent, stopping all 4 sabers at the same time with the Force. The silence echoed through the corridor, as Skywalker used the Force to thrust his opponent backwards, as he manually grabbed his lightsaber and spun forward. His momentum crushed down on Grievous, dropping a saber from his hand and with it, one of Grievous' forearms. Their duel was kicking back off, and the general, with only 3 arms left, batted each of Anakin's attacks away. The fight was between 2 primarily offensive fighters, and Anakin had to take advantage. His speed was remarkable for a human being, and Grievous arrogantly believed he could stop it. Their weapons slammed, forcing Skywalker to spin back, but with the distance, he used a nearby wall to give him momentum, forcing Grievous off balance again. Skywalker in the process was able to rip another hand off the droid general. Anakin steadied himself, and saw 2 sabers on the floor and decided that this would be the right time to try something he'd never done before. Grievous watched his opponent in anticipation, realizing that there was no more running from this fight. But as he kept his eyes on Skywalker, he became frightened. The 2 sabers on the ground ignited and lifted off the surface, before spinning around Anakin. He tapped into the Force and concentrated with all of his will into controlling the weapons. Skywalker then pressed forward, remaining still as each of the 3 sabers slammed into Grievous' defense. He held himself off, fighting 3 phantom sabers controlled by ungodly powers. Grievous winced as he was sliced across the ribs, and wailed when he felt a slash at his neck. Grievous was the ultimate dueling machine, but his cybernetics had never prepared him for this force manipulation. Skywalker's eyes continued to be forced shut, and with each passing second another cut or drag was added to Grievous's body, until Anakin opened his eyes, lunging through the attack and grabbing his own saber, before driving it straight into Grievous's chest and ending his life. As the sabers waved in the air over him, he flung them into opposite directions to cut down the onlooking battle droids. One of these two sabers hitting the back of the super tactical droid, freeing Padme. The two of them met in the middle and embraced, but before they could enjoy the moment, she pushed the two of them to the command console, and told him that they could deactivate everything for the Separatist military. Out on Kashyyyk, Kenobi and the 212th were engaged in a tense fight. The droids were knocking on their doorstep. Snipers fired down from the trees and turbo tanks roared forward, dispersing thousands of rockets to both attack and defend. Cody and Kenobi stood side by side, defending each other and firing back into the ranks of the Separatist war machine. As these battle droids got closer, they started to slowly drop. What was initially an intense fight quickly became an all-out rout. The tanks died. HMP gunships dropped from the sky. Staps dropped into the sea. Spider droids collapsed on top of other battle droids, and those who made it to the surface turned off, just like they had at Naboo. Across battlefronts like Megiddo, Boz Pity, Felucia, and Keda Nemodia, droid defense forces crumbled. The fight for the galaxy had seemingly come to an end. But this wasn't the end of the fight. Sidious, having realized that Skywalker's disappearance was a certain flaw in his plan, decided to execute Order 66. He was completely unaware of the shutdown command given out to the clones, and so, after losing contact with Grievous, decided that he needed to act now. Palpatine planned on going to Mustafar to kill the Separatist leaders following the completion of his plans on Coruscant. First, he would execute the Jedi by joining 2 clone divisions in a march on the Temple. He would then create his empire and follow that up with a shutdown command over the droid armies. So, across the galaxy, as Jedi saw victory in their sights, they also enjoyed their last moments of life, embracing the peace that was just beyond the horizon. For many talented duelists and fighters, it would be their last fight. Kenobi on Kashyyyk would be saved by the Wookiees, and Luminar on Dooku. Their escape would be uncertain, but Obi-Wan did not kill Cody in his escape. Out on Mandalore, the 332nd had their own troubles. Luckily for Ahsoka, she, like Obi-Wan, was saved by the locals. Bo-Katan's Mandalorian resistance saved Tano, but the clones that fought beside her were much more unlucky. Rex, Jesse, Vong were among many clones to get clobbered in the Crimson Dawn recapture Mandalore. Maul saw the weakness in their assault and capitalized off of it. He would lead his own counterattack on the fleet over Mandalore, a strike that would garner Crimson Dawn its first real navy. Meanwhile, after clearing out the droid forces on Siskeen, Anakin would bring R2 to the facility and rebuild him using some spare parts he found, after finishing his other hand. There were a few rations inside the base and a starfighter that he gave to Padme. More than anything, he wasn't in a rush to get out of there, and truthfully, neither was she. They were happy to see each other again, and they didn't have to be secret about anything while being here. Consider this an extension of their honeymoon, without the mooning. However, Coruscant was a different tale. The fight for the temple was intense. Sidious pulled out all the stops, Grand Inquisitor, the entire Royal Guard unit, and 2 divisions of clones. The entire Coruscant Guard was present, including stationed clones from various units that were put together by Commander Fox and taken under his lead. Sidious accompanied this group for only one reason: assured victory. He knew the Jedi Council had Yoda and Windu, and he believed that both of them could be defeated by his hand, so he walked in at the back of the flank with 2 lightsabers in hand. The temple was a mess by the time he arrived. Sindralik had been caught off guard, and the counselors were acting quickly to defend groups of younglings. Had this just been one group of clones, it would have been a sustainable fight, but this was a massive showing. Thanks to Grand Inquisitor, the temple guards were trapped inside the archives, but Sindralik, after safely getting his Padawans away from the conflict, confronted the temple guard, known as Violam. Their duel would rock the archives, but it would free the rest of the unit to disperse into the temple, where they could join up with Fisto, Kohler, Kaj, Shakti, Windu, Yoda, or Sassim. This was a stacked group of counselors, but with the Royal Guard slipping into the temple and the clones establishing a perimeter, the Sith attack was going swimmingly. Sidious at first had no opponents. His first 2 kills were Wanderers trying to sneak behind clone lines. and he gutted those fools without even trying. Frankly, aside from the adrenaline of the fight, he was quite bored. He could see the counselors gathering their defenses, but it would never be enough. Yoda and Windu were on opposite sides of the Great Hall. The other 5 counselors were working through various corridors. Their main prerogative was ensuring the safety of the future, which was very easy to accomplish. Jocasta Nu and Terra Sinube led the children and the younglings out to the temple through an extra access point. Master Keller and Beck gathered a group of knights to defend the younglings and Padawans on their escape. This didn't mean the Jedi had any intention to surrender the temple away though. They were going to destroy these clones, these royal guards, and this Chancellor if it was the last thing they did. Once they were finished, then they would leave. All the younglings were going to be headed towards Tennu, so they were safe. Sidious, finally, as the clone numbers started to shrink, made his own attack against the knights and guards of the Jedi Order. Though as he was doing this, Shaak Ti lunged in, catching him by surprise. As she had against Grievous, she was running a defense in order to help the less qualified fighters stand a chance against Palpatine. She defended herself from Sidious's rapid attacks, before slicing through a royal guard and losing one of her Laku to a strike made by Palpatine. It hurt like hell, but she continued to defend herself, until Yoda came in to support her, giving his fellow counselor a chance to aid other pockets of Jedi survivors. Sidious knew that Yoda would be winded, which he was, and also the dying Jedi around him would be distraction enough to get him killed. But despite how tired the Grand Master was, he was watching his peers die around him in real time. Every single one of these students he watched grow up. And so, this wasn't a revenge mission. This was in desperation, and he vowed to himself to save every single one of the Jedi fighting for their lives at this moment. With Windu forcing the Royal Guard unit to surround him, the Jedi started getting more leverage against the clones infiltrating their home. The counselors and temple guards were absolutely crucial for this defense, and now it was Yoda's turn to finish off this assault. He crashed into Sidious's weapon, using his blinding speed to force the Dark Lord to keep up. Master of Light and Lord of Darkness collided, Sidious's 2 blades against Yoda's 1, mimicking the fight that had just transpired on Siskiyne. Every Jedi had a duty to fulfill, and here it would be Yoda's burden. They pushed at each other, using the wide and open space to acrobatically attack. Sidious found it shocking, immediately, how powerful Yoda was even for his old age. So he knew that he needed to even the odds. Inside the Senate building, he could have used pods, but here he didn't know the layout. Palpatine was very unfamiliar with the Jedi Temple. Their duel commencing once more, Yoda pressing aggressively, using nearly 900 years worth of training to counter everything Sidious threw at him. He tossed away, lobbing Yoda over himself, but the Grand Master gracefully landed, before spinning towards and leaping back, only to lob his saber out of his hand at Sidious. Palpatine blocked the strike, and as he moved to attack the Grand Master, Yoda pulled 2 pillars that had been blown up in explosions towards each other. Sidious, seeing this at the last second, held his arms out and defended himself. This contest became one of the Force, Yoda pulling in and Sidious pushing out. Their duel of the Force was magnificent. 2 massive pillars held at arm's length apart, mere meters away from ending Sidious's life, but that wouldn't be the final blow. It'd be a Jedi Padawan who miraculously survived a fight with 3 clones, who saw the engagement within the Great Hall. After having killed their 4th clone, the Padawan lobbed their saber through the air and into the back of Sidious, forcing him to release his grip on the pillars, which allowed Yoda to crush Palpatine's dying body. Following the death of the want-to-be Emperor, the Jedi would defend their home, cutting down every last standing clone and royal guard, before taking their leave of absence. Commander Fox, who was among the last of the survivors, called for reinforcements, but by the time they had arrived, the Jedi had already left. The whole day would come to a conclusion with Maul's death. Yeah, as it turns out, attacking a fleet of Venators wasn't a totally bright idea. Maul won, which wasn't the problem. His issue was assuming the crews didn't send a distress signal. And because every other siege was finished, and the clones had a little of that Order 66 love coursing through their veins, they showed up on Mandalore. Crimson Dawn was blinded by a system fleet, one that demolished every single pirate fighter. Maul, in the middle of the engagement, got into an escape vessel that was also blown out of the sky. He luckily survived that, but the escape pod he tried to use would certify his death. When the smoke cleared, no one knew what happened. Due to the clones being pretty much wiped off of Coruscant by the Jedi, Anakin and Padme came back to pure confusion. They, without communicating to the rest of the Republic, had no clue what had happened. The 2 of them were jubilant because they thought they had won the war, which they kind of did. They just didn't finish it. Skywalker would have to hide in Padme's apartment until the smoke blew over, which wasn't terrible, because by the time it did, Luke and Leia were born. The now family of 4 would have plenty of time to get used to being around each other. Padme would assist in the Senate rebuild, but Anakin would mostly shut himself off from the Order. He believed that Obi-Wan would have told the Council about the whole marriage, but he didn't. They were upset with Dooku's brutal death, but honestly, after everything they went through during Operation Nightfall, they couldn't care less. Good, Dooku was dead, who cared? He was one less problem to worry about. Tennu would remain the Jedi homeworld for decades to come, because it could accommodate their numbers and mostly everyone present was happy with it. The veterans of the Temple Defense would be distrusting of the Republic for the rest of their lives. The anticlimactic end to the Clone War left both sides of government confused. The Separatists expected a big battle, but who Dooku was revealed to them. They no longer cared for their cause, and they couldn't do anything if they did. Their armies were no more. The Republic had its own problem with trusting the clones, because in the fashion that Palpatine's body was found, no one really knew what happened. But Masameda, buying himself a seat at the Chancellor's office, would reveal the whole truth, explaining that he planned on informing the Jedi about Order 66 following the conclusion of the war. The public would buy it, and he'd be sworn in as the new Chancellor, something he'd actually do a fine job with. This was peak gaslighting. After the peace treaties were signed, Representative Binks would become senator, as Padme intended to step down to be with her family. Anakin wouldn't interact with the Jedi for months, but when he learned that they weren't upset, he considered returning to their ranks. But being that they were stationed all the way out on Tennu, he decided against it. Ahsoka, on the other hand, would rejoin, filling in Anakin's spot as a Knight of the Jedi Order. Despite the disconnect following the war, Anakin would remain very close with Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and even Yoda, who was very interested in Skywalker's personal life. The nosy green frog couldn't help but be happy for Anakin. He finally found his inner happiness, and that to Yoda is all that really mattered. He would be seen as Luke and Leia's godfather, because Kenobi was pretty much an uncle. Truthfully, once Yoda stepped down from the role of Grand Master, he embraced the title of Godfather. While he would of course never leave the Jedi Order, he'd become the great elder of the Jedi, and guide them as they transform themselves following their traumas. The Skywalkers would, on the other side of things, remain a tight-knit and close family, one where friends were considered family, and one where the eventually 3 kids would grow up loved and adored by both parents, their aunts and uncles, and their godfather, free to choose lives that best fit their own desires and their greatest dreams. And that, my friends, is our story. And special thanks to the patrons:
Manuel Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese to Beginning and End, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Smoobs, There Are Cars, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pura, Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewo 670, Annika Stink Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngling Slayer 66, Man Manu Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Ford's Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man of 3 First Names, Darksing 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing.
Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So this is basically taken, let's be real here, this is basically taken, just without the particular set of skills line that I kind of forgot to add into the story. But I really like the idea of having Anakin removed from the whole Coruscant thing. I thought it'd be interesting to have this big duel between Anakin and Grievous, and even him using that power that Kreia used. Early in the story, I was like, what if I removed his hand and then he kind of went the rest of the video without it? And I really like doing that because it kind of added some more tension. It let Anakin use that power that Darth Kreia used, which is the force manipulation of the lightsabers, which I thought would be really, I don't know, I thought that was really cool. I hope you guys like that part of the story. As for Sidious, on the other hand, I think in this scenario, without having Anakin present on Coruscant and so many counselors present, I think he would just try and load up the defenses. And truth is, like, if Grand Inquisitor didn't get defeated by Syndralic, I think he would have won. I think that literally is what holds the Jedi Temple together. I think if the Temple Guards aren't able to get out of the archives, I think Sidious wins in this scenario. In this scenario, they get freed by Syndralic, which is kind of homage back to how important he was for being the first Jedi killed in Order 66 in the Temple. So I hope y'all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.